Welcome back to Ghost Pirate Entertainment. I'm your host, Kanan Becker, and today we talk about the 10 scariest horror movies of 2024. If you've been watching horror for any real length of time, you're probably desensitized like I am, and very little, if anything, scares you. So when I was putting this list together, I talked to a lot of you guys to try to get an idea of what you guys thought was scary this year. So I took that into consideration, as well as the fact that what is scary is so subjective. It's different for every one of us. We're all scared by different things. And so what I did with this list was I tried to compile a list of what I think are the 10 best movies at demonstrating the different types of scary that exist. And with that, let's get to the list. Infested is a French creature feature horror movie. Directed by Sébastien Vanessek, it stars Theo Christine, Jerome Neal, and Sophia Lessefree. Residents of a rundown French apartment building battle against an army of deadly, rapidly reproducing spiders.
Théo, tu te caches, Théo. Tu te fous de ma gueule.
So I think this one is kind of a no-brainer to be on this list, because in my opinion, as far as creature feature and especially spider type of horror movies, this is the best one we've seen in a long time. Because if you're even slightly scared of spiders, this one's gonna scare the living hell out of you. I would say I'm pretty far from being afraid of any bugs, especially spiders. I think they're fascinating, interesting. I'm not saying I'd let them crawl all over me or anything like that, but I would definitely hold one and pet one or whatever, especially a bigger spider. So my point is, I'm just not someone that is scared easily at all by bug movies or spiders or any of that. I don't get the willies, I don't get creeped out. And this one made my skin crawl. After I was done watching it, I was still looking around, and I swear I still saw spiders crawling on things when I was trying to go to bed that night. But it's also just a fantastic movie. It's well directed, well shot, the cinematography is great, the special effects is on point, and it's so well made that Sébastien Vanessek, the director of this, was hired on to direct one of the next Evil Dead movies. So that says something right there. I just think this movie is a lot of fun and definitely deserves a spot on this list. Beezel is a supernatural horror movie, co-written and directed by Aaron Fradkin. It stars Victoria Fradkin, Nicholas Robin, and Bob Gallagher. Over the span of 60 years, 3 occupants of a cursed home discover an eternal witch that lives beneath it, with an insatiable thirst for human souls.
Why are you doing this, man? I've made a lot of sacrifices in my life, and I was chosen by her.
This movie is so creepy. It'll definitely give you the willies if you've ever lived in a house that has a basement. Because when you go down those steps into a dark basement, this is the kind of nightmare that your brain creates. I know for a number of years I lived in a house with a basement, and every time I would go down there and I had to turn the light on, it would be pitch black. I would always picture the most horrible monsters and demons and just all kinds of stuff going on down there. And this movie really plays on that fear. But it's also a very fun horror movie and feels a lot of ways like a throwback. It has great special effects. They were working with a limited budget, but what they were able to accomplish was definitely impressive. So if you're looking for a spooky, eerie horror movie, this is a fantastic pick.
It's not real. 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 Who said that?
This is very real.
The first Omen is a supernatural horror movie, co-written and directed by Arkasha Stevenson. It serves as a prequel to The Omen from 1976 and stars Neil Tiger Free, Ralph Ineson, and Maria Caballero. It follows a young American woman who is sent to Rome to begin a life of service to the church. But she encounters a darkness that causes her to question her faith and uncovers a terrifying conspiracy that hopes to bring about the birth of evil incarnate.
You must be very careful, Margaret. Bad things will start to happen around her. evil things.
So this was kind of a tough pick for me because I'm also a big fan of Immaculate. But because this movie and Immaculate are both really dealing with a lot of the same fears and are very similar movies, I went with the one that I felt is just slightly better made. But this is such a visual feast. It's gorgeous. It's so well shot. The costume design, set pieces, everything just jump off the screen. But it's also so moody and atmospheric and really plays into the dark, shadowy creepiness that a really well done religious horror movie can thrive in. But I was also blown away by the performance of Nil Tiger Free in this. Her performance in this was as good as any performance I've seen this year. This is the movie that really surprised me the most going into a theater this year because I did not expect it to even be good. I thought it was going to be another boring remake or prequel or sequel or whatever, and it was going to just be very cookie cutter, just a cash grab using an IP. But Akasha Stevenson had a totally different thing in mind because she went and made her own movie. And yes, technically it is a prequel, but it does feel different, enough so that it separates itself from your normal run-of-the-mill prequel, sequel, spin-off of a big franchise. So if you're a fan of atmospheric, creepy, religious horror movies, this is a definite must-see.
It takes on a life of its own.
Stopmotion is a British live-action animated horror movie, co-written and directed by Robert Morgan. It stars Aisling Francosi, Tom York, and Carolyn Springall. A stop-motion animator struggles to control her demons after the loss of her overbearing mother.
Who's coming?
The man no one wants to meet.
The Ashman.
This was the first movie to really impress me this year. It's well acted, it's well directed, it's a well done character study that shows this figure slowly breaking down mentally, and the way that it plays with that is really well executed. But the real star of the show here is the stop motion. It is so creepy, so eerie. I mean, it reminds me of Tool's first couple music videos that were stop motion. It has that eerie quality that those had. But then this takes it and pushes it even further because these little figures are made out of meat. And I just couldn't help but feel so grossed out with the way they look and the thought of them smelling, and just, it's such a visceral experience that this takes you on. It is a small movie that really deals with a lot of dread and anxiety, but I found it to be spooky and uncomfortable and just hard to watch at times. So when I was putting this list together, this was one of the first ones to jump to mind.
Everyone must know he's here.
Daddy's Head is a horror movie, written and directed by Benjamin Barfoot. It stars Rupert Turnbull, Julia Brown, and Charles Aitken. A boy and his stepmother fear for their safety after an eerie creature resembling the boy's recently deceased father visits them.
Isaac.
Dad?
Come to the forest.
This was a recent release. It came out just a couple weeks ago, but I love this movie. I think it's so underrated, so well done, and I've been kind of surprised that more people haven't been talking about it. Because if we're talking about scary, there's a couple scenes in this that really got under my skin and just gave me the willies. But it's also moving and powerful and emotional. The performances are fantastic in this, and it deals with grief in such a realistic way. It brought back a lot of my memories. I had a lot of loved ones pass when I was very young, and I just saw myself in the little boy in this. But it's also creatively shot. The special effects that they do are very fresh and original feeling. And sure, you don't get a ton of creature stuff in this because that's really kind of not the point of this movie, but they give you enough, and there's enough eerie other things going on around it that I thought it's definitely nightmare fuel. So I'm not saying it's necessarily one that's gonna scare your pants off, but there's definitely some moments in it. Either way though, it's a fantastically made movie that definitely deserves your time. Smile 2 is a psychological supernatural horror movie, written and directed by Parker Finn. It's a sequel to Smile from 2022 and stars Naomi Scott, Kyle Gallner, and Dylan Galula. A pop star begins to experience a series of increasingly disturbing events as she's about to go on tour.
What is it? Get away from me! Louis?
This is one of those movies where I've been kind of baffled by the responses I've seen from a lot of people. But then I have to take a step back and think about that what scares me, what gets to me, what gets under my skin and disturbs me is going to be different than what does, everybody else. And this is a perfect example of that because I've seen people talk about, yeah, sure, it had some good jump scares, but other than that, and it's like, I didn't even remember it had jump scares. I didn't think that the jump scares in this really stood out to me. What stood out to me as being terrifying is the psychological element. I felt like the way they show someone losing their mind and having these delusions and all these different experiences that someone dealing with mental illness really can deal with, I found to be incredibly disturbing. But that comes from me having a lot of personal experiences with people very close to me dealing with things that are very similar to what you see in this movie. So a lot of that has kind of shaped me into who I am now as an adult. And so those fears still linger in me because I had a really abusive upbringing, and that's because one of my parents dealt with extreme mental illness. So trust me when I say this movie gets to my core. And I've seen a lot of people talk about it's a pop star. We don't have any sympathy for a wealthy, famous, having the world at their fingertips person like that. And I understand that sentiment, but the reason I think that it's important that that was the situation here is because it shows that everybody, no matter how rich, how famous, no matter who you are, we can all be struck with mental illness in one way or another. Even if it's not us personally, it could be someone that's close to us. I just think this is an incredibly compelling movie with a wonderful performance by Naomi Scott and everybody else involved, and is definitely one of the better ones this year.
I'll be waiting.
Longlegs is a crime horror thriller, written and directed by Osgood Perkins. It stars Micah Monroe, Blair Underwood, and Nicolas Cage. In pursuit of a serial killer, an FBI agent uncovers a series of occult clues that she must solve to end his terrifying killing spree.
I saw a beast rise up out of the sea with 7 heads and 10 horns. And on his horns he wore 10 crowns.
I just found this movie to be incredibly disturbing, very uncomfortable. It's full of dread and anxiety, and it just feels dirty and has many different layers to it, which means there's a lot of different interpretations of this movie. And I know it's a real hit and miss one. I know a lot of people that thought it was way overrated, and then other people that think it's the best movie they've ever seen. I personally think it's a brilliant movie, but I don't know if I would go as far as to say it's the best movie ever or anything on that level, but I do think it's one of the best this year. Because once again, I was impressed by Micah Monroe. The type of performance that she gives in this is different than what we normally see from her. And then the performance that I feel like has been ignored the most in this, but that was truly impressive, is Alicia Witt, because she plays this older mother figure that has some, mental problems, and she does that role so good. It's just haunting, so creepy. But I also thought Blair Underwood was great in this, and of course, Nicolas Cage. I mean, he is just a modern day chameleon. He transforms into so many different roles. It's crazy because in the same year, you could see him in 3 or 4 different roles, and yet each one of them feels different and unique. And I get it, this character didn't work for everyone, but it did for me. I thought he was incredibly chilling, made me really uncomfortable. I felt like this movie played with so many disturbing and uncomfortable ideas, but some of those were just not as obvious as others. And so I think some people have seen this in their first watch and maybe didn't gather all the information that was here. But that's just not for everyone. I personally love movies that are kind of a puzzle and that I have to kind of put together after I've seen seen them, but I know a lot of people think that that means it's a poorly written script. If you walk away from a movie without answers to certain questions, then that means that the filmmaker didn't do their job right. I personally disagree if it's intended. I mean, if they're trying to give you the answers, but you just don't pick up on them, that's one thing. But when it's a talented filmmaker like Osgood Perkins, it's intentional. You're meant to be left still thinking about this movie and having to kind of come up with some of your own conclusions on your own. But I think this movie is awesome. I've seen it numerous times, and every single time I come away with something else.
The midnight sun will rise. And you will see his glory.
Lord of Misrule is a folk horror movie. Directed by William Brent Bell, it stars Tuppence Middleton, Ralph Ineson, and Evie Templeton. During a local celebration, the daughter of the town's new minister goes missing, leading to the revelation of dark secrets.
But he stands in the fields and waits.
Who stands in the fields and waits?
Grace.
I think on this list, this is the one that is probably flying the most under the radar. I just have not heard it talked about nearly enough, and I don't know why, because it's well acted, well directed, it looks fantastic, it's available on a big streaming platform, Hulu, but it didn't have a theatrical release, and I know that a lot of times if a movie doesn't get a theatrical release, it's treated as lesser. But I'm here to tell you, that is not the case with this. It deserves more attention. It is incredibly well done, especially if you're a fan of folk horror like I am, because it goes into some really dark, disturbing places. It just has this oppressive, heavy feeling to it. It is a movie, though, that is made by the final act. This is one of those that you have to stay with it, you have to be patient, and it does have that slow burn kind of payoff, because the ending of this, the final act in this, is just chilling with some really haunting imagery, things that'll definitely stick with you. But if you're looking for a creepy cult movie that just feels drenched in darkness, this is a fantastic pick.
As I've always believed, there's nothing that can't be explained.
Oddity is a supernatural horror movie, written and directed by Damian McCarthy. It stars Carolyn Bracken, Gwilym Lee, and Tadine Murphy. It's about a blind medium who tries to uncover the truth behind her sister's death with the help of her psychic abilities.
Why do you want it?
He took my sister's life. I want to see what was going through his mind.
So if you've watched this channel very much this year, you have probably heard me talk about this one, because it's one of the few movies that has really ever made me feel fear on any level in a very, very, very long time. And it's not that it did anything completely unique and different. It's not that it reinvents the wheel or anything like that. It's just incredibly well put together. The pacing of it, the way it's edited, the visuals, it's done expertly in a way where it just lets things linger just a little bit longer, enough that it really will affect you and get under your skin. But it's just packed full of creepy imagery. It's very atmospheric and moody. It's also really well shot. But the filmmaker of this, Damian McCarthy, also did Caveat, which was one of my favorite movies from that year when that came out as well. But I think one of the really big stars and what helps this movie stand out to me is the props department, the set deck. It looks amazing. The different things from the big wooden man to the different props in the Oddity shop, just all the little things in this, they all kind of have this accumulative effect that just gives the overall movie an eerie feel. So I think if you've been sleeping on this one, this is one you definitely need to check out.
Who are you hiding from?
You'll Never Find Me is an Australian horror movie, written and directed by Indiana Bell and Josiah Allen. It stars Brendan Rock, Jordan Cohen, and Elena Karpaitis. A strange and lonely man lives in a mobile home park, and during a violent storm, a mysterious young woman appears at his door seeking shelter from the elements.
I'd really need a lift into town.
I'll take you there when the weather lets up.
So out of everything this year, I found this one to be the most disturbing. Now, what is scary? Like I said in the beginning of this video, that's so subjective. It's really up to you to decide what scares you, what gets under your skin, and what even is scary. It's just a really hard question to really ever answer. But as far as a movie that I think is disturbing and definitely sticks with you, makes you uncomfortable, makes you think, and just disturbs you on a really deep level, this one to me was my number one pick. Because throughout this movie, it slowly builds the dread because it's a mystery. It doesn't tell you exactly what's going on. It slowly reveals it. And as you little by little start putting the pieces together and the picture becomes more and more clear of what you're watching, it gets more and more riveting as you're just glued to the screen, but also very uncomfortable and disturbing. It is a very small movie. It is kind of an art house slow burn. But I do think it's incredibly well written, well performed, well directed, and definitely deserves a lot more attention than it's getting. But for me, in my opinion, this is the most disturbing and scary horror movie of 2024. So do yourself a favor this weekend, pick one of the movies off of this list, grab your popcorn and your candy, and enjoy! And I want to give a huge, massive, enormous thank you to the Ghost Pirate crew, to you guys over on Patreon, and to the channel members over here. You guys mean so much to me. And if you would like to help support this channel over on Patreon, there's a link down in the description. Or you can become a channel member and help support the channel that way by clicking on the join button down there. But like always, thank you so much for watching. Please crush that like button. And remember, guys, horror can be fun. And if you enjoyed this, click right here to watch me talk about 10 horror movies that I highly recommend. And I'll see you guys next time.